Hey, welcome to the Ask-A-Pastor podcast. We're going to jump into some questions that you have sent in. If you have questions, send them to us. We'd love to take a look at them and be able to spend some real time discussing those together. askapastor@orchardhillchurch.com is where you can send to those. Today, I'm joined by Kurt and Mike. Kurt, why don't you tell us a little bit about Mike?
So this is Mike Novak. Mike's been a longtime part of Orchard Hill Church, a business owner in the Pine Richland area, owned the Pines Tavern for, 41. I knew it was a long time, and recently sold it, so has had just a great business and sense and place in the community. Also has been a big part of the church here, has been on our elder board, instrumental right now with our venues, working with our venue committee, and just an all-around great guy. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you.
Christmas decorator extraordinaire.
That's right. That's right. If you've ever come to Orchard Hill on Christmas Eve, the handiwork of Mike Novak is seen all around with all the trees and decor, and now at the Strip District in Butler County. So it isn't just
growing.
It isn't just Wexford anymore. We're having to get extra storage units, things like that. But yes, that is Mike. That's a great thing to remember.
The Strip District building was covered with snow as we put it
Oh,
away.
that's put it away, yeah. That's funny.
So tell us, Mike, you're on the, are you current board member?
No.
You're not.
I'm on the venue committee.
On a venue committee. Mm-hmm. Tell us what excites you as you just work on venue stuff. I mean, you've been doing a lot of work. Really.
Well, it's great. I feel like I'm a roaming ambassador for the main campus, and just being among people that are excited to see things grow and watching it grow, and the enthusiasm, it's just very uplifting. To me.
So for people who don't know, we have how many venues right now? Where are they? What are they like?
We have two. We have one in the Strip District, or Penn Avenue, 1620 Penn Avenue, and in Butler County, up on Duffy Road, off of Duffy Road. Yeah. Yeah,
and exploring another one in the Triborough area.
Another one
as well.
coming. That's very exciting too, in Triborough, Pitcairn.
Yeah,
that'd be nice.
That's really exciting.
Very exciting.
The subject that we want to dive into is just around Christians in business, and want to specifically talk about business more so than being an employee. And so obviously wanted you here as somebody who's lived a life of running a business and now gets to look at that in the rearview mirror. And so I'm not sure where to start other than to ask, tell us a lesson that you've learned as a business owner in, balancing, I'm a Christian and I'm in this business. There's going to be some things that are in tension there. So what comes to mind when you?
Well, I think that being a Christian in business is just being authentic to your beliefs. I've always been Christian, but never like it was until I came to Orchard Hill Church. I mean, I was raised Christian. I was raised Roman Catholic. And it's living out those visions that you have to make a culture where people thrive, whether it's your customer or your employee. And so from the very beginning, I was raised in a very waspy neighborhood, and I was part of the only Catholic family. And when we went into business originally in 1968, my father was like, the neighborhood's going to go downhill because they're going into the bar business. And I was determined, I was actually offended by that, and I was determined to prove that you could be in the hospitality business and serve alcohol and still have a good reputation, and have a business that people were attracted to. Yeah. And so that was part of my own personal mission after I got into the business. I had done some corporate work before that and some government work. But when I got into this business, I thought, well, this is my opportunity, because I grew up in that community, to become somewhat of a influencer in that community by what I did. And I think that's the biggest thing you can do is you behave the way you want to be seen, and you act out those Christian values that you were raised with. Yeah. And I know that at that time. And the funny thing is that looking back, one of the reflective things is that in good times and bad times, I always felt the support of God in every decision I made. I looked for it. I looked for the counsel. And that's where I turned if it wasn't so good. Yeah. It was just here that I was able to, more verbalize that, have a Christian community support.
So just out of curiosity, 40 years,
I was 2 when we went into business.
What's that?
I was 2 when we went into business.
What
I'm in 40s forever.
What kind of changes did you see in the industry over 40 years?
I pretty would say that probably on the employee side, work ethic, and I was always very fortunate because of the area that I'm in. I always had a lot of people to draw from. I think that we're multi-generational right now in the workforce. I mean, my youngest was 17, my oldest was 87. I had 2 87-year-olds and 2 17-year-olds.
Wow.
So you have any of the generation X's, Y's, everything going through that at the same time. So when I started out, it wasn't that diverse as far as age was going.
Okay.
So trying to, they say like being in business is like being a team of horses, you want to stay, pretty much a straight shot to there, and trying to balance all those different values of those generations makes it quite different to be a leader in that time,
Yeah.
and you have, and I see this, I served as a school director at Pine Richland also, and they have the same issue that teachers that have been there 30 years versus teachers that have been there, are just starting new. So there's different, values at that time in their lives.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Kurt had you come and speak to the staff at least one time, and share some of your what would you call it? What was that? It was on
values.
Hospitality values.
Yeah,
that's right. Obviously, you had a lot of intentionality in the values and how you train staff at the Pines. What sort of motivated that?
The desire to succeed, to make an organization that was successful. And you have to, the values are your key, I believe. And, for example, being a Christian, everybody there knew I was a Christian.
Yeah.
I didn't do anything exceptional. I mean, I would take our invitations for Christmas Eve and hang them up on the bulletin board and things like that. But they knew by my actions and the way I behaved, what the expectations were. And that was because the values, which became the core values of the company.
Yeah.
And that everybody went through orientation. They knew exactly where we were at. And if that changed, then, we would make changes accordingly to fulfill that.
Did I hear you say that correctly, that the core values of the company were your core values?
Right.
So that the company reflected who you were.
That's right. The company was that. And I think good leaders, I think that's a good way to look at it for, anybody in a leadership role.
Yeah.
That their core values, there was, again, I was in, business that served a lot of alcohol. Did I stand around and get drunk as the boss? No, I didn't. Yeah. But and then the same token, if you're the boss, the values you have at work don't go away when you go home.
Yeah.
It's a symbiotic type relationship within yourself to go home and you're still the same way.
Yeah. Yeah. Kurt, what do you think of this? He said that his ultimate desire. Not ultimate desire, that your desire in being intentional was to make the business succeed. How do we speak to business people, whether they are owners or just in helping run the business, about success and the desire to pursue success?
I think success is good. I think it's better than not having success. Yeah. And I think business, if it's a business that helps people, so feeding people is helping people, providing a service is helping people, that done is helping human flourishing, which ultimately is part of success. And so helping people have jobs, helping people receive services is all part of, I would say, the original creation mandate, which is be fruitful, multiply in the earth, make the earth, cultivate it, help it thrive. That is responding to the call of God. And I think from a vocational standpoint is a high calling, just as a quote unquote ministerial vocation would be. So I would try to move away from the sacred divide, secular sacred divide, and try to say they're both sacred when done unto God, and so success is a good thing. I think where it can become problematic is when it becomes more important than human flourishing, and that is seen when you start to take advantage of workers, when you start to cut corners, and are dishonest with something in order to get success. Then all of a sudden you're not helping human flourishing. What you're doing is you're actually hurting it because you're cheating something along the way. And so a company that that employs people below human accepted standards for their own success financially doesn't feel to me like they're helping human flourishing.
Yeah.
Now, I know the argument is, well, the people do ultimately what's good for them. And if it's the best job available, you are helping human flourishing. There's truth to that. But I think you at least have to ask that question.
Yeah. I live in a neighborhood where the business district is not, I wouldn't say is thriving. And so, we watch these places open up, and they're open for 6 months. And sometimes we look at it open up and say, that's never going to work. And, 6 months later or 18 months later, it closes. And all of that is so negative and discouraging, I think, in the neighborhood. And just to think of a place that has been open for 40 years. Was it open before you were a part of it?
It's been open since 1914.
Wow. And will be open again
Yes,
after some things are done. What an incredible thing that would do for a community. Like if I think of the neighborhood that I'm in and think of, a thriving business being there for that long and doing good in the neighborhood, I'm totally with you. There's this verse in Jeremiah that many of us are familiar with. It says, this is talking to the people of God as they're out of their homeland, they're in exile, they're in a land where they don't want to be, and the advice or command that they're given is build houses and live in them, plant gardens and eat the produce, take wives and have sons and daughters, take wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage that they may bear sons and daughters, multiply there and do not decrease, but seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on its behalf, for in its welfare you will find your welfare. And just this idea that that we are blessed when we seek to have our neighborhoods, our community, our nation blessed, is such I think, a powerful idea. Any thoughts that you have towards that?
From a business perspective?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's part of a business most credo, that you have to become involved. It's good for business, number one, to be involved in the community. And, each time, I always told my staff that we actually were in the people business. We really weren't in the food business. Food was what we did, was secondary. Building relationships with our customers was primary.
Yeah.
And that extended into to the neighborhood. And we had a mission statement for our giving, in the sense that, if you were a resident of the Pine Ridge School District, or Hampton or Mars, North Allegheny, places that surrounded us, that yes, we would support things as they evolve, if they were related to the arts, related to history, right? Things I liked, quite frankly. But that was reciprocated so many times, and they supported you and saw that you were invested in the community, as opposed to just there to take something from the community.
Yeah.
And it could be something. And we used to work very closely with the Northern Tier Library. We did breakfast with Santa. It was donated, that type of thing. And then because kids became the prom kids, the homecoming kids, the wedding rehearsal kids, because they had a relationship with us. They had come there, was breakfast with Santa 30 years ago. Yeah. My first busboy is now 58.
That's incredible.
Yeah. And I have a Secret Service agent, a astronaut, an actor on Broadway. I mean, this is all from this region. And it was just, always a joy to work with the younger people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You both really can answer this question. The question is, as a business owner, one of your responsibilities is to maximize profit. And in the church, you just have this same sort of you have to balance the books, and you want to make sure that what is coming in is more than what is being spent, and as best as possible. So let me ask you, Mike, first. How do you think about that sort of Christianly? As my part of my job is to maximize profits. Is that a Christian thought, or have you felt conflict in that?
No, not at all. I think that the Christian perspective is to do well, and that profit is part of that. However, profit's not the main goal. Profit's the excess of doing good, providing to your staff.
Yeah.
Profit is able to go on and reinvent yourself, go on with the next remodel job, things like that. And it's different in a smaller business, and I think a smaller business is defined by anything under $10 million in sales now. I never had shareholders, so there is where you have a responsibility. Now, it's shareholders. My shareholders were my customers, but in big business, you have to show a profit that drives other things in the marketplace. So I think in small business, you have a little more flexibility in that. But I think it's very Christian to desire to want to succeed, to grow, and make people do well around you. I mean, if my employees weren't doing well, I wasn't doing well. So.
Yeah, the church is, I think, a little different in that profit, certainly from a financial standpoint, isn't the goal, but I think stewardship is an important element, meaning you do have to think through all of those things. And I certainly feel a lot of weight because we have about 50 employees, and so I feel the weight of the economics providing for all those families, saying we can't extend too far and then have to let people go because that's part of how people live, and whether it's health insurance and salaries and all of that, and so from that standpoint, it's probably very similar to a business, but certainly our goal is to take whatever profit we have financially and reinvest it into helping more people find a relationship with Jesus Christ.
Yeah. So how though do you balance that with greed? Because ultimately, the better the business does, the better you do. So you have to walk this fine line of, I want the business to do well because obviously you want your employees to do well, you want the neighborhood to do well. But there's this part of you that probably is always thinking, when this does well, I do well personally.
Sure. And that should be one of your goals. But I think there's a way that you present yourself or the business. I mean, I was always conscious of what kind of car I drove. I employed a lot of people that were entry level, and I think that how they see you give, like, back to the community. We always celebrated everything, whether it was somebody's birthday or somebody, was accepted at school. I had a lot of people that were in college or they got hired to another job. So I think it's sharing that celebration with people.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. How do you...
Let me just piggyback on that. So you just said something that's interesting. You said you were conscious of the car you drove.
Mm-hmm.
So say more about why that type of symbolic decision matters, because I assume what you're referring to is I probably could have afforded a more expensive car than the one I chose to drive, but I didn't want people that were working with me to feel like, oh, you're taking all the profit or something like that. Say more about what went into that kind of thinking.
As an individual independent business owner, I'm working side by side with people that are less fortunate, have come to this as a part-time job, have struggling through school loans, that type of thing. And they knew that I was successful. I mean, it's 40 years. If I haven't been successful by then, there's a problem. And financially rewarded by that time too. But even early on, as a single person, I mean, I always loved to have a nice, sports car or something like that. But I was very conscious of, about that. But again, it was a reflection of my personal values that I also respected where you were at in life, as opposed to where I'm at in my life also.
Yeah.
And then this is attainable. It was an example too that you can have better things if you work hard.
Yeah.
I mean, I was very fortunate to have a team around me for most of the time I was there, and not that we didn't go through trials and tribulations. I mean, we did, but that were very supportive. And again, I was trying to pay the very best I could, and I was an open book that way too. I didn't hide anything. If you had a question, ask it. And I answered it, and I can show you, where we were at financially, or good or bad. So it was good to, not be, I could have done more things or traveled more or whatever, but I chose not to.
Yeah. How about I'm sure that it was always hard to separate yourself from the business.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't mean like not working all the time. I'm just talking about, coming to define yourself by the Pines. How do you do that? Because that's a struggle for every person that works, or every person, every person, not just people who go to work.
Well, I came to that realization. That's a good question, because I think so many people struggle with that as a person. Being a leader in an independent restaurant or in any leadership position sometimes can be pretty lonely. And you have to look out and around and about to learn what other people are doing. I mean, I was very lucky to have a lot of people who wanted to mentor me, give me advice. I always looked to other people outside the business. I looked to like corporations like Disney. Can I pull something from there? What makes them magical into my business? That type of thing. So I really pursued those things. When I came here to Orchard Hill, it was interesting. I was very lucky that for the first 20 years that everything I did was very successful. And I went through a rough patch, and my wife, I'm very fortunate to be married to a wife who was an HR executive for many years and had a lot of good advice. And one day I was talking to her. She was working in the PPG place, and I'm driving down 79, and I'm looking at the building, talking to her on the phone, and she says, I can't help you anymore. If you need to call Orchard Hill and talk to somebody up there. And she says, because if you don't call them, I will. and she didn't. I called, and like 20 minutes later, I got a call back from the church. And it was from Danny Parker at the time. And, he basically, I told him what's going on. He says, I'm going to introduce you to somebody who was a business person here at Orchard Hill. And we talked a little bit, just briefly, piqued my interest. And so what I found out at that time, or the next year and a half being involved here, was the Pines is what I did. It wasn't who I am. And so I knew that, but I didn't act it out. And I didn't think that way. And I had changed the way I thought about things. I had to have a new vision for myself. And so where I sought at building the business, obviously the press accolades. I mean, we have numerous awards. I took them all down, actually. At the restaurant, there was none of things. Okay. Press clippings, whatever it was, anything. We were covered very extensively early on, and we received local and national recognition.
So you're not like Five Guys. You don't have...
No, but I know what you mean there, because every time you go to the restroom. And so,
didn't know there were that many awards given
that's right.
for burger places.
That's right. So, and I didn't feel I had to do it. And I changed, and that part of my being more Christian, I guess I would say, was changing the mission of how I approached that. And the identity wasn't focused on getting all the awards. It was focusing on the core business values. So to answer your question further, it's like, again, the Pines is what I did. It's not who I am. And I was able to, mix that together and, find out who I really was.
That's such a powerful Christian value to say, rooted in humility. Instead of us being the one that's going to tell you how great we are, even though we're pointing to what other people have said, we're just going to let the product speak for itself, and we're going to let other people speak positively about us. And I think that's one of those interpersonal, that's just a great way to live our lives. How would you answer that question, Kurt, just about not letting our work become our identity?
That's... I think that's a challenging thing, as you alluded to, for just about anybody. And I would guess that there's two things that happen probably to help anybody with that. One is you probably need to come to a crisis point. It sounds like you hit one.
I did.
where you have to almost put a stake in the ground and say, this is not me. I am something apart from this. But then there's probably hundreds of choices along the way where you have to decide that over and over again proactively.
Correct.
Or it will re-consume. You can have the stake in the ground moment, and then you find yourself right back in the same zone. And so I think it's there's a process of coming to realize it and say, I don't want to be defined by this. Because when you start, you almost do. It's like, oh yeah, I'm this, I'm that. And then you hit a point where you say, well, no matter how successful or unsuccessful this is, I don't want this to be the definition of my life. I want the definition of my life to be something else. And hopefully if from a Christian standpoint, that becomes my identity in Christ, because other than that, any other identity ultimately isn't safe. Even a family identity isn't entirely safe. And so to say, that's my real identity. But then you'll be pulled back in. Something will happen, and you'll say, well, I got to get this, or I'm not enough, or this isn't enough. And I think there's a give and play. And I think the the more you grapple with that, the more solid the ground becomes.
Yeah.
The less you grapple with it, the more shifty it is.
Well, I think that one of the key words I used was process, and I think one of the things looking back is that everything seemed to be a process, and this is where I say that God came into this. At the time, is that the process was being defined as I went, and it took time. And it usually wasn't on my time. It was usually on, when I'd say now, God's time. I got everything I wanted. It just wasn't on my time frame. So I think that anything, again, when I went through a tough time there, it was a process. And, and if I went through great times, it was a process. And if we wanted to achieve a goal, there was always a process in there. And I think that our human side becomes impatient. And sometimes we turn that also into on ourself. Well, I haven't done the right thing. I'm not good enough, or whatever thing like that. Or on the reverse side, if it was something bad, why me? Well, why not you? Yeah. Because, you have the tools to deal with this. That's why it's happening to you, So, it's again, it's a give and take type relationship to with everything, your family, your business, and trying to balance that. I mean, I was always the type of guy who was an overachiever. I was going to work this till it's done. And the thing is, I can say this after 40 years, is that I still left there loving what I did. It just wasn't who I was. I always tried to find something outside of work to help balance that. I had my family life, which, we had a routine. You had to balance that. My wife was an executive. So, but we kept to our routine, and she supported me. I supported her. But, going on to, I went back to Pitt in 2010. I was a school director. I was back to here at the church. I always had something to balance me on the other side, so I didn't become too tied up. And I also saw things in other organizations that helped me, which I pulled back into my organization. Yeah. And I also saw that I wasn't alone. And going and getting involved with those type of groups and things like that, everybody, all businesses have problems,
Yeah. Tim Keller has a book called Every Good Endeavor. I've just been totally blessed by that book. We have a ministry in the Strip District where we're reading through that book a couple chapters at a time and discussing it. And our gathering is called Work Matters because we're discussing, I guess the premise of his book is that...
You've had a good turnout for that too, haven't you?
It's been great. Yeah.
I know, I almost came down
like
one morning.
6:30 in the morning. Too, so and the premise of the book is that the work that we do, it is part of our calling from God. That and you said this, Kurt, that like we were created to cultivate and to fill the earth, and so part of what he talks about is that as we do our work, it's when we do our work with excellence, if we're doing it for the glory of God, then or I should say that if we see our work as an extension of God's calling on our life, then as we do our work with excellence, we are doing it to the glory of God. And so I just think that's just a great way of looking at our work. I don't know about you, Kurt, but like there are parts of my job, even as a pastor, where it's like, I hate doing this, and this is time consuming. It doesn't have a clear outcome. But the concept is, and I say this to us because people look at us and they say, idiotic things. They're not idiotic, but they're not true.
Like you just work like, 3 hours a week?
No, they say that. But
do you know what my comeback to that is? I don't even work that much, half an hour. The rest of it, I just have the 30-minute slot. Everything else, that's my comeback now when somebody says that.
Yeah. So the sort of uninformed thing that someone will say is, wow, it must be so great to feel like everything that you do is like building the kingdom of God or building the church. And it's like, that person can go to work to the glory of God better than I can some days, because even if I'm sitting down to write a sermon, if they're doing their work, whatever that might be, to the glory of God, and I'm just doing mine because I need to get through it, then what they're doing is more glorifying to God than what I'm doing. And that's just, I think, changes completely how we think about life and work. That you can see your role, whether that's being a homemaker or going to work for somebody else or being a business owner, to I'm going to do this with excellence, because when I do it with excellence, I'm doing what God's called me.
And I think that's a challenge too, being Christian in the workplace.
Yeah.
Because not everybody in the workplace is Christian. And that used to bother me because I like to say, well, I'm turning all this is good stuff, and I get this one person who's betrayed me or did something that they shouldn't have done. They knew clearly it was against what we wanted the values to be. But but on the reverse end is that's part of my glory of God, is trying to create this workspace that does glorify God through whatever means possible. And, there's many times I doubted myself and said, why am I doing this, that type of stuff. But you keep persevering. And I think, you have these goals and you want to meet them. One of the funniest things that happened, and I look back, I've had a lot past 2 months to reflect, but last week we were open. I had a gal who had come in to help us because we weren't rehiring, but she had worked for us, and she was struggling, single mom, and she said she didn't have a ride into work, and I wasn't doing anything so other than closing the business. And I said, I'll go down and get her. She just lived in Hampton Township. So we're driving back, and I had some familiarity with the background of this gal, but we were about halfway to work, and she said to me, you're religious, aren't you? And I said, well, it depends what your definition of religious is. I said, but yes, I said, I believe in Jesus Christ, and, as my Savior. And, she says, well, I lost one of my friends yesterday to drug addiction. Oh, wow. And she says, or actually she was sick, but this gal's husband had died from drug addiction, and this girl developed cancer. And she says, and they have a 7-year-old child. She says, I need a prayer. Can somebody pray? Can you pray for this? And we're sitting in the car, and I'm thinking, God's funny. I mean, he really has a sense of humor. To show me, yes, after 40 years, you being a Christian is paying off right this minute. Yeah.
Wow.
And that was really eye-opening to me. And I actually got out of the car and I think, I cannot believe this just happened to me. But somebody I really didn't have a big relationship with knew that I had a relationship with Christ. So that there was like defining proof that this did pay off after 40 years and being involved.
It's a neat moment.
It was a very neat.
Kind of, especially in those last days. And even neat in the context of you had it because you went out of your way to serve her. And rather than just saying, hey, it's somebody else's problem.
Sure. Yeah. So it was neat.
Yeah. Joel, what have you kind of seen having kind of a second business as well as working in the church? Yeah. What have you seen as the primary difference between how you lead and work in one context as in the other?
Oh, wow. I think one of the things that I've struggled with in that environment, and we're going to explore this more in depth in another podcast, is I've come to see that in the things that I've done outside of the church, was involved a little bit of real estate and opening up this brewery, is that the more I work, the more I get paid. And that's been just a very interesting, like you have to draw a line someplace. You have to, decide when is enough. But I would say in terms of how I work, I approach all of those things the same way. I have boundaries with people, both in that setting and in my role as a pastor. And I also always try to approach things with faith in Christ. Not always faith in people, but with faith in Christ. Yeah.
Okay.
What? Just out of curiosity, over the years, what would you say was the percentage of people that you hired that were believers versus non-believers?
I'd say, well, that's a good question, because 40 years ago there was more people going to church. So I think that the people, and I was 23 years old, and the people that I was supervising were all in their 30s and 40s and 50s and 60s.
You were running this thing when you were 22 years old?
Yes.
Holy cow.
Yeah. So, that's a long story. How many chapters is this? Is this a series? But anyway, I think that, after we came to Orchard Hill too, and, I met people and things like that, and they had kids that wanted to go to school and they wanted to earn extra money. I had a lot of people that came to me because I was Christian. They knew that I was Christian from here, my association with Orchard Hill. So I would say that probably towards the middle of the last year, I'd say 1/3 of the people were Christian. Other ones were believers but not practicing, and the other third really didn't care one way or the other.
Okay.
So.
And I would guess in part that's because of who you are, that those people were maybe more attracted to being a part of your business.
Sure.
Did you ever feel like that made your decision, influenced your decision one way or the other in hiring?
I'd be lying if I said no.
Yeah.
That's a question that I have to uphold the laws of the United States government. So that's not an overt question that I would come out right and ask them, something like that. But I could tell by their behaviors. And, if they had good families, generally speaking, your son or daughter coming out of there that from a practicing Christian family they're going to have a good work ethic. They're going to have good values. That's not always true. I mean, I've had Christians that I didn't want to work for me.
Yeah.
And I had to fire because, it's just part of business.
Right.
You're dealing with a lot of different people. And again, it's the leader's values in the workplace to uphold what's right and wrong.
Yeah.
And then, Christians make mistakes too.
I worked for a construction company in college.
I remember this story.
Yeah. And the man who I worked for was a Christian man, went to the church that I'd gone to. And he said, when he hired me, he said, "You're the first person I've hired from church faith in a long time, because the last several people I hired actually gave the church and the faith a bad reputation in the business because they weren't great workers. They weren't easy to work with. They just did not represent well." And so he said, "I'm taking a chance on you." And that's always stuck with me, because I think a lot of times people who are of faith don't realize how much their actions are being assessed and equated with the whole of faith.
Yeah.
In terms of, every interaction, somebody's saying, "You did that. Well, like, what are you doing?" And I remember, this is kind of an aside, but I'm guilty of the same thing. I used to play basketball over here, and there was a guy who came in who was a pastor at another church. And I remember he just got real amped up one day, and nothing crazy at all. But I remember having the thought, like, "Man, you're a pastor. You shouldn't do that." And I'd probably done that same thing numerous times. Mm-hmm. And my point again is just, it's interesting. I think we don't always equate or see how substantial those moments, like you just are describing, are, or the negative side mm-hmm. of those moments are in business, if somebody knows that you're a person of faith.
And in my business, in the hospitality industry, we have a lot of, again, entry-level people who are down and out trying to get into it. If you don't believe as a God, like in God of second chances, I'd give somebody a second chance. And if I was wrong, I was wrong. But if not, I saw more people turned around and be able to be launched out of there, whether they were there for the summer or whether they were there, to break away as a single mother. That was, again, very satisfying to see. They got their chance here. They went on to do something else. So if I wouldn't have given that second chance, if becoming in late consistently, or and we had a process. I mean, again, the process. There was a time period of going over there, and where you had to cut the cord at some point. But you had to be able to. If you didn't believe in them, they didn't believe in you. So I couldn't get my vision across. I couldn't get my values across if I didn't believe in them. Yeah. And as time has gone on, there's been more and more of that, just a change in generations.
Mm-hmm. Let me throw out a few. These are rapid fire questions. So to get through a few of these, let's each give just a couple sentence answers. This person writes, "I've made a bad reputation for myself at work. How do I begin to change that?"
I think that you do it by your behavior. You changed. Again, if you were the person that was late all the time, you come in on time and consistently. I mean, I think consistency is probably the biggest thing for an employer to watch an employee. Is this a one-time thing? Was this an accident? That type of thing. Or they can, or you trade off this. In other words, they may be late because they have to come through town for traffic, and they're on the way home from work, and so they're going to be, depending on how the traffic is. But if they're the best server and they can sell you like nobody else can sell you, I can balance that.
Yeah. And maybe just owning up to where you've made a mistake before. I think people, they'll watch you more closely if you say, "Hey, I know I made a mistake," but it also then lets them go, oh, and they'll almost start the clock running fresh again because you owned up, rather than holding the past things against you with just trying to change behavior.
Yeah. How about this? My boss or my company only cares about the bottom line. How can I be a Christian in this environment?
That's interesting, because I'm sure, and I have also received that type of thing, where they feel that they're a better Christian than you are, or they know more theologically than you do. And some things in the workplace just are. And sometimes as the leader, you can try to change things to accommodate that particular type of individual. And sometimes it's just not possible. So my thing is to move on.
The other thing is, nobody who hasn't run the exact business you've run understands the exact dimensions that you understand. Meaning, I understand something about running a church. I don't understand what it takes to run a restaurant or a brewery. And whatever I understand about leadership, I don't understand your business. And somebody who works even in your business and hasn't been in charge of it in that chair still doesn't understand. And it's okay to I think you're wise to say, they can make their critiques, but they don't understand the whole, even if they're very close to it. And I think that's helpful just to remember.
Yeah. When is it time to either close a business, start a business, or sell a business?
That's an interesting question, because my mom said I would know it was time. But I have to say that I probably, just common sense, as far as selling my business, which was successful, but it had tough times too. It was just, I knew that it was time. I couldn't take it anymore where I wanted to go at that point, and that I knew that I had to be absorbed by a larger organization. So the opportunity presented itself, and that's when I took it. As far as closing a business, I think it comes back to that personal life. You have to balance it. It depends what's going on in your life. There's a lot. I just heard of a business, another restaurant that was closing because of an illness, and that was where I feel that no matter what was going to happen to me, I was blessed in the sense that I was going on at my own terms. I wasn't sick, and I wasn't financially distressed, which are the three things that are going to close a business. And sometimes what I always feel bad is, and I never critique other restaurants or other businesses based on my uninformed knowledge sometimes, because I know how hard it is to get up every day and do that. And you do it like you guys do. It's a 7-day-a-week job. You may be on Sunday nights or whatever, but you're really on. And so, in today's environment, I was very fortunate that we were open 5 days a week. So I did have some downtime, actually within the business, just to keep up with maintenance and the paperwork and that. But I think that closing a business is really hard, because we do identify so much with that. And why did it fail? This is a brilliant dream. That's great. Everybody likes this, but why isn't there? And that's where, again, as a small business owner, you have to reach out to other people, and you have to become involved in an organization that comes alongside of you, either for spiritual purposes or business purposes, to help say, okay, I had a mentor come in from Pitt, and he said to me, it was very, very rough guy, but he was extremely successful, and said, "There's nothing wrong with you. What the heck do you want me to tell you here today?" And I said, well, look at my books. He says, it's time for you to get out. You can't go any further here. That type of thing. Wow. So that started that process rolling, but I still loved what I was doing. I was still too young to do it. And again, I was fortunate, and actually a Christian bought my business. So, and that was really weird, because I felt the presence of God. I kept thinking, what did my parents think at this time? They're both gone. And, but I felt that when he said to me, the facilitator left the room, and he said, "Do you go to church?" And I said, "I do." He says, "Well, so am I. Let's get this still done." Oh. So it's kind of cool.
Yeah. Kurt, what would you say to somebody who's wondering, I'm working a full-time job. Should I start this business?
Well, there's obviously, if there's a passion for it, I don't think you ever go wrong trying something. So I would generally lean towards saying, if you're feeling a desire to do that, probably better to go try and do it than it is to sit in something that you don't want to do.
Yeah.
Some people don't want the stress. They would prefer to be able to say, I go home, somebody else has the ultimate problem, because there is more stress if you own something than there is if you work at it, even if you're highly invested. So yeah, I guess that's not much of a answer, but I would say if you want to do it and it makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. I think getting a group of people around you that know you and some people that know that industry a little bit, just to give you feedback where you need it, encouragement where you need it. I think that can go a long way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, my wife and I went to the Pines just a couple months before it closed, and we don't normally go up that way because we drive towards the city whenever we want to go to a restaurant. So, but we had such a great time. Great service. Our server was really great. Food was excellent. So good job in the work that you've done there. And
many good meals.
Yeah.
From the Pines.
That's right. And many that you've brought here as well, just as a way to bless people. So, yeah, good job for a lifetime of leading a business and wanting to do it, especially to the glory of God.
Thank you. Thank you.
Send your questions to Ask a Pastor, and we'd love to look at them in the future.